In the quiet halls of Fairmont Academy, a place where privilege was worn like a second skin, one boy carried a secret that no one believed. For Malik Thompson, every morning meant putting on the school uniform and stepping into a world that looked at him, not with acceptance, but with doubt. To his classmates and even to his teacher, Malik was just another child with big stories that couldn't possibly be true. But beneath the polished surface of that prestigious academy, reality was about to break through in a way no one expected. Because the father Malik spoke of with such quiet pride wasn't a janitor nor a clerk. He was a man who carried the kind of responsibility that could shift the balance of a nation. And on one unforgettable day, that truth would walk straight into Malik's classroom, leaving no one untouched. The blazer always seemed heavier on the mornings Malik most wished it would feel light. Dark navy, with a thin crest stitched over the heart, Fairmont Academy was written in elegant letters inside to golden laurel branches. He buttoned it in front of the bathroom mirror and tugged at the sleeves, trying to convince himself that they fit him as naturally as they fit everyone else in that school. The tie at his neck felt like a rope, pulling tight each time he breathed. He had already learned to control those breaths, small and quiet, the kind that no one could notice. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like toast and oranges. His father sat at the table with a mug that had the words "Best Dad" in chipped blue letters, the kind of gift a child picks out when love is bigger than an allowance. Nate Thompson carried himself with precision even in his quietest moments. Broad-shouldered, always focused, he scrolled through something on his tablet with the kind of intensity he seemed to bring to everything. Bills, news, work emails. His eyes narrowed at one of them, but within a second his expression was calm again, as if the flicker of worry had never existed. "Eggs are getting cold," Nate said without looking up. "They were never hot," Malik answered. A small smile crossed both their faces, and for a brief moment, the heaviness of the morning lifted. He ate quickly because that was the rule. Nate closed the tablet and studied him with that searchlight gaze of his. When Nate looked at you, it felt like he could see every layer of what you were trying to hide. "You've got your presentation this week," Nate said. His voice was calm, steady, never quite a question, because he always knew. 2 minutes about what our parents do," Malik said. He tried to sound casual, but pride slipped into his voice anyway. "I'm telling them you work at the Pentagon." For a moment Nate didn't speak. His hand hovered over the mug. He didn't flinch, didn't smile, just chose his words like someone choosing which wire to cut. "You can say where I work," Nate said slowly. "Not what I do." "I know," Malik nodded quickly. He had been practicing this line for years. "You plan, you protect, and the rest you can't talk about." Nate's mouth twitched into almost a grin. "That's the version that keeps everybody safe." The clock ticked loudly in the kitchen. Outside, a trash truck groaned past the house, followed by the hiss of the early bus. Mornings in Fairmont always sounded mechanical, like the breath of a machine. The drive to school was quiet. The sedan smelled faintly of pine cleaner and winter cough drops. At the school gates, luxury SUVs lined up in formation, polished chrome flashing in the weak sunlight. Malik felt the weight of his uniform again as a boy climbed out of a car with wing-like doors. His laugh was loud, confident, the kind that echoed because it belonged there. "You good?" Nate asked, eyes on the crosswalk. "Yeah, head high," Nate said. He always said it, like posture was a shield. Malik stepped out into the morning, each stride rehearsed. The lawn outside the school was clipped so short it looked artificial. The flag above the courtyard stirred weakly in the wind, unable to decide whether to rise or fall. Inside, the foyer smelled like polished floors and old paper. Brass plaques lined the wall, recording names of past debate champions and prize winners. Generations of children who had lived here like royalty. Malik passed them the way people walk past gravestones, reading but refusing to let the names sink in. Malik, the sound of his name snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Noah Park, jogging toward him with his backpack dangling off one shoulder and his hair stubbornly resisting. Gravity. Noah was sharp, kind, the first friend Malik had made at Fairmont, the one person who didn't look at him like he didn't belong. "You ready?" Noah asked. For what? Malik already knew, but he wanted to hear it from someone whose voice didn't turn sharp when it said his name. Ms. Whitaker single quotes S mood. Noah grinned. Bet she ironed it this morning. Malik groaned, but he laughed to Ms. Whitaker was their homeroom teacher, tall, polished, and always in control. Her smile was neat and exact, the kind that was pleasant but not warm. She ran the room like a stage where every student had their role. Sometimes Malik wondered if she wanted him to succeed. Sometimes he was sure she didn't. Room to be buzzed with the pre-bell noise of kids who had never had to wonder if they belonged. Backpacks slammed against desks, voices rose and fell, laughter spread easily. Brent Hafford stood near the windows, retelling some story with his arms spread wide, surrounded by classmates who leaned in like his words were gold. The bell rang, and Ms. Whitaker glided in, a wave of perfume and authority. "Good morning," she said, and the room fell silent. They recited the pledge, listened to the announcements. Then she lifted her chin and tapped the tablet in her hand. Family Work Week presentations. Tomorrow, we begin. Each of you will share what your parents do and how their work inspires you. Presentations will be alphabetical by last name. Relief spread through Malik's chest. Thompson. That meant the end of the list. However, Ms. Whitaker continued, tomorrow we'll do things a little differently. We'll start with volunteers. Who would like to go first? Hands shot up immediately. Brent's, Sophia Vales, a few others. Ms. Whitaker smiled at them warmly, the kind of smile that made approval feel like a reward. Then her eyes swept the room again, pausing just long enough on Malik. Or, she said brightly, we could choose a name at random. Her nail tapped the tablet. The screen lit her face with a blue glow. Malik Thompson. She smiled again, not unkind but not kind either. You'll go tomorrow, Malik. 2 minutes. Bring a visual aid. Noah glanced sideways, eyebrows raised in sympathy. Malik nodded, trying to look unbothered, though his pulse was loud in his ears. He would be ready. He had to be ready. The rest of the morning dragged by. Math problems lined up neatly, answers marching in order, but his mind kept drifting. Reading class felt distant, as if he was sitting outside the window watching it all happen to someone else. At lunch, the cafeteria thundered with noise, laughter bouncing off the walls. Malik and Noah sat at their usual table by the mural, a painted skyline stretching across the wall. What's your visual aid? Noah asked between bites of his apple. You could print out a picture of the building. Google's full of them. They'll say I made it up, Malik muttered. He hesitated, then said, I'll bring his lanyard. Noah's eyes widened. Are you allowed the strap? Not the card. Malik's voice was firm. Some rules were carved into stone. The card never left Nate's possession. They ate quietly for a while until Sophia passed by, her group of friends surrounding her like a moving spotlight. She stopped, smiling genuinely. Hey, Malik, your dad does something in government, right? Yeah, he said, careful. Defense, that's awesome, she said brightly, but then added with casual innocence. Just make sure you keep it factual. Ms. Whitaker's big on that. Her words sank deep even though she hadn't meant harm. Science class was vinegar and baking soda volcanoes. Malik liked the way the reactions were predictable, rules obeyed without exception. If only the world worked like that. If only truth erupted clearly enough for everyone to see. When the final bell rang, the day finally released him. Outside, the SUV spurred in the pickup line. His dad's sedan waited, smaller, older, but solid. How was it? Nate asked. Fine, fine good or fine fine, fine fine. Malik hesitated, then admitted, I go first tomorrow. Nate's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. You prepared? I think so. I'm bringing your lanyard, the strap, not the card. I know. The drive home was quiet. Through the window Malik saw row houses, a barber shop, a corner store with a graffiti-covered door that looked like both anger and art. At a red light Nate glanced at him, and his voice was steady. You don't have to make them believe you. You just have to tell the truth. That's enough. Doesn't it matter if they believe me? Malik asked. It matters to them, Nate said. Not to the truth. Sometimes doubt is camouflage. People can't hit what they refuse to see. The words echoed in Malik's head as they pulled into their driveway. Homework was done at the dining table. Malik carefully laid the lanyard flat, its dark blue strap gleaming slightly. He imagined the moment in class, the eyes on him, Ms. Whitaker's face forced to stay politely neutral. That night, he passed by his father's office. Nate sat motionless at the desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard, his face illuminated by the glow of the tablet. For a moment, he looked less like a father and more like a soldier waiting for orders. Malik thought about asking what was wrong, but stayed silent. Some questions were better left unspoken. Lying in bed, he built the speech in his mind, rehearsing the safe words, rehearsing how to stand without shrinking. Across the room, the blazer hung like a banner on the closet door. Tomorrow, under the fluorescent lights, he would tell the truth. He did not know yet that the truth was preparing to walk into his classroom on its own defeat. The morning began with the kind of silence that never felt comforting. Malik adjusted his tie again in front of the mirror, but no amount of pulling or tugging made it feel right. It wasn't the fabric around his neck that made it heavy. It was the knowledge of what was waiting for him at school. He had practiced his presentation in his head all night, saying the words over and over until they felt carved into his tongue. His father worked at the Pentagon. That was the truth. But the truth was not always enough. Downstairs, the kitchen was quieter than usual. Nate was already dressed, his suit neat, his eyes sharper than usual, as if his mind had been awake long before his body. He poured coffee into the chipped mug, the one that Malik had given him years ago. Without looking up, he asked, "You ready?" Malik hesitated before answering. "I think so." His father turned his head just slightly, studying him. "Remember what I told you. You don't need them to believe you. Just tell the truth." Malik nodded. The words were simple, but they weren't easy. The drive to school felt longer than usual, the car moving through streets that seemed quieter, almost watchful. At the gates of Fairmont Academy, Malik saw the same polished cars, the same groups of students stepping out with ease, their laughter filling the air like music he couldn't join. He gave his father a quick wave before heading inside, his stomach tightening with each step. The hallway was alive with voices. Students compared notes, boasted about their parents' accomplishments, and teased each other with the kind of lightheartedness that Malik had never mastered. Noah caught up with him quickly, falling into step by his side. "You ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Malik said with a half smile. "Good. Just remember, no matter what happens, I know the truth. That's what matters." It helped, but only a little. The classroom buzzed louder than usual. Brent bragged loudly about his father's latest business deal, and Sophia mentioned something about her mother meeting with senators the night before. Their voices carried a weight that filled the room. Malik sat quietly, his hands gripping his notebook, waiting. The door opened, and Ms. Whitaker entered. She walked with her usual composure, her clothes pressed, her hair perfectly arranged, her smile warm but sharp at the edges. "Good morning, class," she said, her voice carrying that tone she used when she wanted to seem kind, but still in control. "Today is the first round of our family work week presentations. I trust you've all come prepared." Her eyes scanned the room. "We'll be going in alphabetical order today." That means she paused, checking her tablet, though Malik was certain she didn't need to. "Thompson, you're up first." Malik, his stomach dropped. He had expected to go last. Now, every eye in the room turned toward him. His legs felt heavy as he stood, the strap of his backpack biting into his shoulder as he walked to the front of the classroom. He cleared his throat. "My name is Malik Thompson," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "And my presentation is about my father's job." "Speak up, Malik," Ms. Whitaker said, her tone already edged with disapproval. He swallowed, forcing his voice louder. "My dad's name is Nate Thompson, and he works at the Pentagon." The room went silent for half a beat, and then the laughter began. Brent snickered first, covering his mouth, but the sound spread like fire. Soon half the class was giggling behind their hands, eyes sparkling with disbelief. Ms. Whitaker did not stop them. Instead, she smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "The Pentagon, Malik?" "Really, yes," he said firmly, though heat burned in his cheeks. "He's worked there for 8 years. "Oh my," Ms. Whitaker said, her voice dripping with exaggerated surprise. "And what does he do there? Is he the president too?" She glanced at the class, giving them a small, theatrical wink. The room erupted in laughter again, louder this time. Malik's chest tightened. He tried to speak. "He works in security operations." I'm sure he does, Ms. Whitaker interrupted, her tone condescending. "Perhaps next time, Malik, we should stick to the truth instead of trying to impress everyone with stories." His throat felt dry. He wanted to argue, wanted to shout that she was wrong, but the words caught in his chest. Slowly, he lowered his gaze. "You may sit down now, Ms. Whitaker said firmly. "We have other presentations to get through today." Malik walked back to his seat on legs that felt like stone. The laughter had quieted to whispers, but the damage was done. Brent leaned toward another boy, muttering just loud enough to be heard. "Pentagon? Yeah, right. Probably the janitor." From beside him, Noah's hand shot up. Double quotes, Ms. Whitaker, Malik isn't lying. "I've seen his dad's ID badge." The teacher's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing. "That's enough, Noah. Unless you'd like to join Malik in detention for disrupting class." Noah froze, then lowered his hand slowly, shooting Malik an apologetic look. The rest of the class blurred by. Malik sat silently, his mind replaying the humiliation again and again, each laugh echoing like a cruel reminder. His hands stayed clenched on his desk, his nails pressing into his palms until they left marks. By the time the final bell rang, the weight of the day felt unbearable. He walked through the crowded hallway with his head down, his body moving, but his spirit heavy. When he finally reached the front steps of the school, his father was waiting in the car, eyes scanning him the moment he stepped inside. "Rough day?" Nate asked. Malik didn't answer at first. He stared out the window, watching the world blur past as the car moved forward. Finally, he whispered, "They laughed at me. The whole class, even the teacher." Nate's grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel, though his voice remained calm. "I see. They think I made it up, that I lied just to sound important." Malik's voice cracked, his frustration spilling out. "Why don't you ever come to career day? If they saw you, maybe they'd believe me." Nate exhaled slowly. "You know why, Malik? My schedule doesn't always allow it. It's not fair," Malik muttered, bitterness in his voice. "Everyone else's parents come. Everyone else gets to prove they belong." Nate turned the car into their driveway and finally looked at his son. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried a weight that Malik rarely saw. "People doubt what they don't understand. Sometimes, being underestimated can be an advantage." "How is being called a liar an advantage?" Malik asked, his voice trembling. Before Nate could answer, his phone buzzed sharply. He glanced at the screen, and Malik saw his father's expression harden instantly. The warmth vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a man carrying secrets. "I need to take this," Nate said, his tone suddenly businesslike. "Go inside and start your homework. We'll talk later." Malik grabbed his backpack and walked toward the house, his shoulders slumped. Through the living room window, he could see his father in the car, speaking quickly into the phone, his free hand making sharp, decisive gestures. For Malik, the sting of the classroom still clung to his skin. The sound of their laughter echoed in his ears. The image of Ms. Whitaker's smirk burned in his memory. He wanted to believe his father's words, that truth was enough. But in that moment, truth felt like a burden no one else wanted to carry. That night, as he lay in bed, Malik stared at the ceiling, replaying the day again and again. He thought about his father's silence, about the strange look that came over him whenever the phone rang. He thought about how quickly Ms. Whitaker had dismissed him, how easily his classmates had decided he was lying. And for the first time, Malik wondered if telling the truth would ever be enough. The next morning, Malik moved slower than usual, dragging his feet through the routine as if each step weighed double. His uniform was neat, his tie tied the same way his father had shown him. But he could already feel the whispers waiting for him. At the breakfast table, Nate tried to keep things normal, sliding a plate of toast and eggs across to him the way he always did, but Malik barely touched it. He mumbled that he wasn't hungry, and Nate didn't push. Fathers in their house often chose silence over pressure. The ride to school was quiet, too. The radio stayed off, and only the hum of the engine filled the air between them. Nate asked once if Malik had his homework, but when his son just nodded without lifting his head, he didn't ask again. He dropped him off at the gate, the same as always, but he lingered for a second longer, watching his boy disappear into the sea of polished uniforms and perfect haircuts. Inside, the school felt colder than usual. Every voice seemed louder, every laugh sharper, and Malik couldn't help but wonder which ones were aimed at him. The memory of yesterday clung to him, Ms. Whitaker's mocking tone, Brent's smirk, the sound of 30 kids laughing because they thought his truth was a lie. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, each one heavier than the last, until Noah caught up with him. "Hey," Noah said, his voice quiet, his eyes already searching Malik's face. "You okay?" Malik tried to answer with a shrug, but Noah didn't buy it. He walked with him anyway, refusing to let the silence settle to heavy. They took their usual seats at the back of the classroom, but Malik's chest felt tight the moment Ms. Whitaker walked in. She greeted the class with her usual polished charm, praising a student who had stayed late to practice, complimenting another on her vocabulary, before letting her gaze rest on Malik for just a moment longer than necessary. "Today we continue our presentations," she said smoothly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "And I'd like to remind everyone that honesty is an important quality. Imagination is wonderful, but in this case we are focusing on facts." The words weren't directed at him by name, but everyone knew who she meant. Malik sank lower in his seat, his hands curling into fists under the desk. Brent grinned at the boy next to him and whispered something that made both of them laugh. As presentations continued, Ms. Whitaker's praise flowed easily for others. She clapped lightly for Brent when he spoke about his father's real estate empire, and she practically glowed when Sophia described her mother's meetings with senators. Each time Malik heard their voices, he felt smaller, as though truth was shrinking him while their half-bragging built them higher. At lunch, Noah tried to cheer him up, but even his jokes felt thin against the weight in Malik's chest. They sat at their usual spot by the mural, but the cafeteria seemed louder than ever. Brent and his group of friends walked by, one of them snickering "Hey Pentagon" under his breath. The rest of them laughed. Malik lowered his head, stabbing at his food without appetite. "Don't listen to them," Noah said firmly. "They don't know anything. They don't need to," Malik muttered. "They already decided." Noah stayed quiet for a while, then admitted something he hadn't planned to share. "My dad lost his job yesterday. The factory's closing. Mom says we might have to move if he doesn't find something soon." Malik looked at him, surprised, the sting of his own humiliation fading for just a moment. "I'm sorry, Noah." "That's awful." Noah shrugged, trying to look braver than he felt. "It's fine. We'll figure it out." The two sat in silence, both boys carrying burdens heavier than their shoulders were built for. That afternoon, Malik tried to make himself invisible in class, hoping if he stayed quiet enough, he might escape Ms. Whitaker's attention. But when the lesson shifted to government buildings in Washington, her eyes lit up, and her smirk returned. "Malik," she said sweetly, "since your father supposedly works at the Pentagon, perhaps you can tell us something about it that isn't in our textbooks." The class went still, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for him to embarrass himself again. Malik's pulse raced, but he had spent the night reading about the Pentagon, memorizing facts so he wouldn't be caught off guard. "The Pentagon has twice as many bathrooms as necessary," he said steadily. "It was built in the 1940s when Virginia was still segregated, so they built separate bathrooms for black and white employees. After segregation ended, they just kept all of them." The room went quiet for a moment, surprised. Ms. Whitaker's smirk faltered, but she quickly adjusted. "Well," she said, "that's correct, though not exactly relevant to today's discussion," encouraged. Malik added, "And it has a hot dog stand in the courtyard that the Soviets thought was the entrance to a secret bunker during the Cold War, because generals kept going there every day. But they were just getting lunch. This time, a few students actually laughed, not at him but at the story. For once, the sound didn't sting. It felt almost like victory. Ms. Whitaker's lips tightened. "That's enough, Malik. Let's move on." But the moment stayed with him for the rest of the day. For the first time, he had turned their laughter into something else, something that didn't make him feel small. Later, as students filed out of the classroom, Ms. Whitaker stopped him. Her smile was pleasant, but her eyes were cold. "Malik," she said softly, "I understand you're going through a phase where you feel the need to embellish the truth. Many children do. But continuing these Pentagon stories is disruptive. I'm not making anything up," Malik said firmly. "Of course," she replied with a nod that wasn't really agreement. Then she leaned closer, her voice lowering. "If your father really works at the Pentagon, why not bring him in to prove it? Parents' Day is next week. That would settle everything, wouldn't it?" Her tone carried challenge, certain that he would back down, admit to lying, or invent some excuse. But Malik met her gaze steadily, his voice calm. "Fine. He will." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Wonderful. I look forward to meeting him." Malik walked out of the room with his heart pounding. He didn't know if his father would agree, but he knew one thing for certain: the look on Ms. Whitaker's face when she saw him was worth the risk. And for the first time since the humiliation, Malik felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in days: hope. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. That night Malik lay awake longer than usual, his eyes tracing the faint cracks in the ceiling above his bed. His mind replayed Ms. Whitaker's smirk, the challenge in her voice, and his own defiant answer. "Fine. He will." The words echoed in his head until they no longer sounded like his voice. He wasn't sure if he was proud of himself or terrified of what would happen if his father said no. Down the hall, he could hear the low murmur of his father's voice. Nate was in his study, the door half closed, speaking into the phone with the same clipped intensity Malik had seen in the car before. Every so often his tone sharpened, like steel striking steel, then softened back into control. Malik couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. He already knew they weren't about bills or schedules. His father's work never sounded like ordinary life. The next morning the kitchen table felt colder than usual. Nate was already in his suit, his tie knotted perfectly, his leather portfolio on the counter beside him. Malik hesitated before sitting down, holding the strap of the lanyard in his hands under the table. He wanted to ask, wanted to explain, but the words clung stubbornly to his throat. Finally, as Nate glanced at his watch, Malik forced them out. "There's Parents' Day next week. I need you to come." Nate looked up slowly. "Malik, you know how difficult it is for me to commit to school events." "I know," Malik said quickly, his chest tightening. "But this time it's different. Ms. Whitaker, she made fun of me. She thinks I lied. Everyone does. She said if you came, it would prove it." His voice cracked as he added, "I don't want them to think I'm a liar anymore." For a long moment, Nate didn't answer. He closed the laptop in front of him, the click of it louder than the silence in the room. His face was calm, but Malik could see something shift beneath the surface, something harder, sharper. "What day is it?" Nate asked. "Next Friday." Nate nodded once. "I'll be there." Malik blinked. Really, Nate said firmly. "I think it's time I met your teacher." Relief flooded Malik's chest, almost dizzying in its intensity. He hadn't expected his father to agree so quickly. He hadn't expected him to agree at all. That night, passing by the study again, Malik saw his father on the laptop, a photograph of Ms. Whitaker briefly visible on the screen before the window closed. Personnel files, maybe. Something official. Malik's heart skipped a beat. Why would his father be looking into her? But before he could ask, Nate noticed him standing there. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" Nate said, his voice not unkind, but firm enough to close the door on further questions. The days leading up to Parents' Day moved slower than any week Malik had ever known. In class, Ms. Whitaker wore a smug smile every time she looked at him, as if she was already preparing for the moment his so-called story would unravel. Twice she made casual comments about imagination and tall tales, each one aimed directly at him. Malik answered only with silence, clinging to the promise his father had made. At night, he sometimes saw the black SUV parked near their house again. One evening he watched a man step out, glance around, then lift his wrist to his mouth as if speaking into something before climbing back inside. When he told Nate, his father simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Some things are safer if you don't know. Trust me." But trust was complicated when the line between safety and secrets blurred so easily. On Thursday night, Malik could barely eat his dinner. He pushed food around his plate until his father looked up. "You're still coming tomorrow, right?" Malik asked, his voice tight. "I said I would," Nate replied. "But sometimes work, not tomorrow," Nate interrupted firmly. "I cleared my schedule." Malik swallowed hard, studying his father's face. "She doesn't believe you work there. She thinks I made it all up." Something flickered in Nate's eyes, a hardness that Malik rarely saw at home. "Does she now?" "Yes. She's been making fun of me in front of everyone." Nate set down his fork with deliberate calm. "Tell me more about Ms. Whitaker." Malik described everything: the favoritism toward the wealthier students, the subtle digs at him, the way she seemed to enjoy humiliating him. His father listened silently, his expression unreadable. But Malik noticed his jaw tighten slightly with each word. When Malik finally finished, Nate simply said, "I see." The next morning, Malik woke to the sound of his father moving through the house. Nate was dressed in a dark suit sharper than his usual work attire, a blue tie knotted precisely, a leather portfolio under his arm. On the counter lay an ID badge Malik had never seen before, clipped neatly to a lanyard, its seal official and impossible to ignore. "Is that your Pentagon ID?" Malik asked, reaching for it. Nate gently moved it out of reach. Double quotes, "Yes. And it stays with me." Malik watched his father check his watch again and again during breakfast, his movements precise, as if he was coordinating every second. When the phone buzzed, Nate answered briefly, his words clipped and professional. "We're leaving now." ETA 20 minutes. They drove in silence until Malik couldn't hold his thoughts anymore. "Dad, are you okay? You seem different today." "I'm fine," Nate said, his tone softening, "just focused." "Are you mad about Ms. Whitaker?" "Not mad," Nate answered after a pause, "but I don't appreciate Yon calling my son a liar." As they approached Fairmont Academy, Malik noticed them first. 3 black SUVs parked along the street, men in dark suits standing beside them, sunglasses on despite the cloudy morning. His chest tightened. "Dad, who are they?" "Support," Nate said simply, pulling into the visitor parking lot. Malik stared out the window as the building loomed closer. He felt nervous, but also something else, something stronger than fear: anticipation. Today, the truth would no longer live in his words alone. Today, it would walk into his classroom. And for the first time in a long while, Malik wanted to be there to see every second of it. The halls of Fairmont Academy buzzed with more energy than usual that morning. Parents' Day always turned the school into something closer to a social stage than a learning space. Families arrived in polished cars, fathers in tailored suits, mothers in elegant dresses, children glowing with the kind of pride that came easily when your last name carried weight. Teachers smiled wider, administrators straightened their ties, and the air carried the unspoken tension of reputation. Everyone knew this day was as much about showing who you were as it was about supporting your child. Malik walked beside his father, his small hand brushing against the dark fabric of Nate's suit jacket. He had never seen his dad dressed like this for school. The crisp lines of the suit, the portfolio under his arm, and the official badge clipped neatly to his lapel made him look taller, sharper, heavier with presence. Malik had grown up with that quiet weight at home, but here, under the fluorescent lights of Fairmont, it looked different. It demanded attention. As they stepped inside, the hum of voices faltered. Parents and students glanced their way, curiosity flickering across their faces. The secretary at the front desk greeted them with a professional smile that wavered. When her eyes landed on Nate's badge, for a moment her words stumbled. "Mr. Thompson, welcome. We're honored to have you with us today." "Thank you," Nate replied politely. "Could you direct us to Ms. Whitaker's classroom? Room 112, down the hall on the right," she said quickly, her gaze still lingering on the badge as if it carried more weight than she knew how to process. They walked through the crowded hall, eyes following them as whispers spread. Malik felt the stares prickling his skin, but for once, they didn't sting. For once, he wanted them to look. At the classroom door, Ms. Whitaker stood with perfect posture, greeting each family with her usual polished charm. She wore a cream blouse and a navy skirt, her hair pinned neatly in place, her smile practiced for the occasion. When she saw Malik approach, her lips curved into a smirk, the same smug expression she had worn when dismissing him in front of the class. But then her eyes shifted upward, catching sight of the man walking beside him. The smirk faltered. Her gaze moved from the suit to the badge, to the firm grip of Nate's handshake when he extended his hand. "Ms. Whitaker," Nate said smoothly, "I've heard a lot about you." Her face paled slightly, but she forced her smile back into place. "Murdoch Thompson, welcome to Fairmont. It's wonderful to have you here. Malik has told me a great deal about your interest in his presentations about my work," Nate said, his tone polite but steady, carrying just enough edge to sharpen the moment. "Yes, well," Ms. Whitaker stammered. "Children sometimes have creative interpretations of their parents' careers. In this case," Nate replied calmly, Malik's description was accurate. Before she could respond, the principal entered the room, his expression bright and almost too enthusiastic. "Ah, Murdoch Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "We are so honored to have you with us today. Parents, students, we have a very special guest. Mur. Thompson is a senior strategist with the Department of Defense." A wave of surprise rippled through the classroom. Parents straightened in their seats. Students whispered to each other, wide-eyed. Brent's smirk melted into confusion. Sophia looked stunned. And for the first time since the humiliation, Malik sat tall at his desk, his chest swelling with pride. Nate moved to the front of the room with the ease of a man who had spoken in far more intimidating settings. He scanned the class, his voice carrying steady and clear. "Thank you for having me. I want to say first that I'm proud of my son. He has shown resilience and character in ways that many adults would find difficult. What I do for work isn't something I can talk about in detail, but I can tell you that every day, men and women at the Pentagon work to protect this country in ways that are often unseen. Prevention is our greatest tool. Success is when the public never knows the danger existed in the first place." The room hung on his words. Ms. Whitaker had taken a step toward the back, her composure cracking for the first time. Malik noticed her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her smile forced and brittle. Nate continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "One thing I've learned in my career is that assumptions are dangerous. Prejudging a situation or a person without facts creates blind spots, and blind spots are often where the greatest threats hide." The meaning wasn't lost on the room. Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Brent looked down at his desk. Sophia's eyes flicked toward Malik, thoughtful and almost apologetic. Ms. Whitaker's face flushed faintly red, but she said nothing. For Malik, it felt like the air itself had shifted. The laughter, the whispers, the disbelief, all of it evaporated in the presence of his father's truth. He no longer had to defend himself. The truth had walked into the room, undeniable, unshakable, wearing a suit and an ID badge. When Nate finished speaking, the applause came hesitantly at first, then stronger. The principal beamed, clearly relieved to have such an impressive guest representing the school. Parents leaned forward, asking polite questions, eager to align themselves with a man who commanded that kind of respect. And through it all, Malik sat with his shoulders squared, no longer shrinking under their eyes, but standing proudly in them. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be believed. But what none of them knew was that Nate's presence at Fairmont was not only about silencing doubt, it was about something else. Because while the classroom buzzed with pride and relief, Nate's phone vibrated quietly in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly. His eyes hardened for just a moment before he slipped the phone back, his smile never faltering. The truth had walked into the classroom that morning, but so had something else. Something no one yet realized was already moving quietly in the shadows of Fairmont Academy. The applause faded, the parents and students shifted in their seats, and Ms. Whitaker forced her usual composure back onto her face. The room returned to its rhythm, or at least it pretended to. Malik could feel the air had changed, though. The stares no longer carried the same doubt, no longer carried the sting of laughter. For once he didn't have to shrink under them. His father had stood at the front of the room and said what Malik had been trying to say for weeks. The truth was enough. After the session ended, parents clustered in the hallway. chatting like they were at a cocktail party instead of a school event. Malik stayed close to his father's side, and for the first time, he noticed how people moved differently around Nate. Even in silence, he took up space in a way that commanded respect. Parents who hadn't looked twice at Malik before now offered smiles, quick greetings, subtle nods. It wasn't Malik they were acknowledging. It was the man walking beside him. Ms. Whitaker approached, her smile polished but tight. "Thank you again for being here, Murdoch Thompson. Your presence certainly added." "Wait to the day." Nate returned her smile politely, but his eyes didn't soften. "It's important to support our children, and to make sure they're treated fairly." Her jaw tightened, though she kept her expression pleasant. "Of course, Malik is a very bright boy. Sometimes he just gets carried away." Nate's gaze held hers a beat too long. "Sometimes adults do too." The words hung between them, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. Ms. Whitaker blinked, her smile faltering for just a second before she excused herself to greet another parent. As the crowd thinned, Malik and his father stepped out into the crisp air of the courtyard. The school lawn stretched before them, perfectly trimmed, the flag lifting gently in the wind. Parents strolled across the grass, chatting and laughing, but Nate's eyes weren't on them. He was scanning the perimeter. Malik noticed the way his father's shoulders shifted, the way his head turned slightly as though cataloging every movement around them. Then he saw what had caught Nate's attention. Parked across the street, half hidden under the shadow of an elm tree, was a black SUV. Its windows were tinted dark to dark. Malik felt his stomach tighten. "Dad, it's the same one from our block." Nate didn't look at him. His voice stayed calm. "Yes, I see it." "Who are they?" Nate kept his eyes on the SUV. "Not your concern. Stay close." They walked toward the car, Nate's steps steady, his hand lightly guiding Malik's shoulder. The SUV didn't move, didn't start its engine. But as Nate opened the sedan's door, he saw it, a faint flicker of movement behind the tinted glass. Someone was watching. The ride home was quiet. Malik kept glancing at his father, waiting for an explanation, but none came. Nate's face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the road, his grip on the steering wheel firm. Finally, Malik broke the silence. "Dad, why are they following us?" Nate exhaled slowly. "Sometimes the work I do comes with attention. It doesn't always mean danger. It means awareness. And awareness keeps us safe." Malik frowned. "But why here? Why at school?" Nate didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was steady but distant. "Because sometimes the people who want to send a message don't go to the man. They go to the people he cares about." The words sat heavy in Malik's chest, pressing down until he had no response. He stared out the window, the city blurring past, wondering if the truth he had fought so hard to prove had just opened a door to something far more dangerous. That evening, Malik sat at the dining table with his homework spread out in front of him, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window. Each time headlights swept past the house, his heart jumped, waiting to see if they would stop. He tried to focus on equations and spelling words, but every sound outside pulled his attention back. In the study down the hall, Nate was on another call. His voice was low, clipped, serious. Malik caught fragments when the door wasn't fully closed, phrases like heightened presence and containment protocol, and not a coincidence. The words meant little to him, but the tone meant everything. Later, Nate joined him at the table, sitting across with a plate of food that had gone cold. "How's the homework?" he asked, as though nothing was wrong. "Fine," Malik muttered, though his pencil hadn't moved in minutes. Then, before he could stop himself, he blurted, "Are we safe?" Nate's eyes softened just slightly. "You're safe as long as I'm here." Malik nodded, but the answer didn't quiet the storm inside him. Safe as long as he was here. What about when he wasn't? The next day at school, Malik felt every glance differently. The kids who had laughed at him now avoided his eyes, whispering instead of jeering. Brent kept his distance, his smirk replaced with something that looked a lot like caution. Even Sophia, who had always been kind in her own way, seemed unsure of how to talk to him now. For once, the silence wasn't humiliating. It was heavy. It carried the weight of his father's presence. But Ms. Whitaker's smile told a different story. She carried herself with practiced poise, but when her eyes landed on Malik, there was something colder there, something sharper, as if the truth hadn't silenced her, but challenged her. And Malik knew deep down that this wasn't over. That night, when he climbed into bed, Malik heard the low rumble of an engine outside. He crept to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. Parked on the corner, under the faint glow of a streetlight, was the black SUV. It hadn't left, and for the first time, Malik realized that the truth wasn't just about being believed anymore. The truth had broad eyes that refused to look away. The morning of the second Parents' Day session began with the same rituals as every other school day. But Malik could feel something different in the air. The light coming through his window looked colder, sharper, as if the world itself was paying closer attention. He dressed in silence, his hands fumbling over the buttons of his shirt, his stomach tightening with every minute that ticked past. Downstairs, his father was already in the kitchen, coffee in hand, his posture straighter than usual. The suit was pressed, the badge clipped cleanly against the lapel. "You ready?" Nate asked without looking up. "As ready as I can be," Malik answered, his voice quieter than he intended. His father studied him for a moment, then placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Stand tall today. You don't need to hide anymore." The ride to school was tense, the silence in the car thicker than any conversation could have been. Malik kept glancing at his father, hoping for some reassurance. But Nate's eyes stayed fixed on the road. His phone buzzed once, then again, but he ignored it. By the time they reached Fairmont Academy, Malik could already see the line of polished cars stretching along the curb. Parents stepping out in clothes that looked more suited for boardrooms than classrooms. And then he saw them. Parked along the opposite side of the street were 3 black SUVs, their windows dark, their engines low and steady. Men stood outside them, tall, broad-shouldered, each one in a dark suit and sunglasses. They looked nothing like the parents streaming into the school. They looked like shadows pulled into human form. "Dad," Malik whispered. "They're here again." "I know," Nate said, his voice steady. "Stay close." Inside the school, the atmosphere was electric. Parents and students filled the hallways, laughter echoing, conversations rising and falling like waves. Malik felt every eye on him and his father as they walked through the crowd. The polished floors reflected their steps, and for once, Malik didn't try to make himself small. His father's presence pushed the space around them open, and no one dared close it. When they reached room 112, Ms. Whitaker was standing at the door again. Her smile was bright, too bright, her voice high and overly cheerful as she greeted parents. But when her eyes fell on Nate, something flickered in them. She smoothed it over quickly, but not before Malik caught it. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something else. Wariness. Double quotes, "Mr. Thompson," she said, extending her hand. "So glad you could join us again." Nate shook her hand, his grip firm, his eyes steady. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it." As the parents and students settled into the classroom, the air grew heavy with anticipation. The desks had been pushed aside to make room for chairs, and the space felt smaller with all the bodies pressed in. Malik sat near the front this time, his father standing tall beside him. The other students whispered among themselves, their eyes darting between Malik, his father, and the badge clipped to his lapel. The presentations began, one after another, parents speaking proudly about their jobs, their children beaming beside them. But the energy in the room wasn't the same as the day before. People were waiting for the moment they knew was coming. When it was finally Malik's turn, Ms. Whitaker's voice carried a sharper edge than usual. "And now," she said, "Malik Thompson would like to introduce his father." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Malik stood slowly, his legs trembling, but his father placed a steady hand on his shoulder, grounding him. "This is my dad," Malik said, his voice clear. "He works at the Pentagon." For a moment, the silence was total. Then Nate stepped forward, his presence filling the room in a way that no amount of laughter or doubt could cut through. He spoke calmly, his words measured, his tone commanding without effort. "I don't often get to share much about my work," he began. "But what I can tell you is that I have the privilege of serving in a place where decisions are made to protect not just this city, not just this state, but this entire country. It isn't glamorous. It isn't easy. But it matters. And I'm proud that my son has always understood that, even when others doubted him. The parents leaned forward in their seats. The students went quiet. Ms. Whitaker's smile froze in place, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her tablet. My work requires discretion, Nate continued, but it also requires honesty. Without honesty, there is no trust. Without trust, there is no security. And without security, there is no future. His words cut through the room like a blade. The silence was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Even Brent, who had been so quick to laugh before, kept his eyes fixed on the floor. When Nate finished, the applause came slowly, then built stronger, filling the room. Malik felt his chest swell as he stood beside his father, no longer the boy everyone doubted, but the boy whose truth had just been proven beyond question. And yet, beneath the applause, Malik noticed something. Through the glass window in the door, a figure stood in the hallway. A man in a dark suit, speaking into his sleeve, his face expressionless behind tinted glasses. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't even watching the presentation. His eyes were locked only on Nate. Malik's stomach dropped. The truth had been proven, but the price of that truth was only beginning to show itself. For a breathless second, Malik forgot how to breathe. The man behind the glass didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't pretend to be a parent peeking in on a sweet school moment. He stood like a signal, and even though Malik could not hear a single word through the door, he could tell the man was talking to someone who mattered. Nate felt it too. Malik recognized the way his father's posture changed without moving an inch, how the muscles along his jaw settled, how his eyes sharpened into the calm that meant he was already 2 steps ahead of whatever was about to happen. Principal Graves slid into the doorway with a rush of energy that tried too hard to pass for casual. He greeted Nate with both hands, too loudly, as if volume could smooth the edges of alarm. Nate leaned toward him just enough for privacy and showed him something on his phone. The principal's smile cracked. His eyes darted to the hallway, then back to Nate, then to Ms. Whitaker, who stood at the back of the room with her tablet clutched like a shield. Parents shifted in their seats, their faces turning the color of questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Nate spoke with the principal in a voice so even that only those closest could hear the gravity underneath. Then he turned back to the room and let his presence settle over everyone like a blanket. "We are going to pause the program for a moment," he said, and the room obeyed before it decided to. "Parents, stay with your children. Ms. Whitaker, please close the blinds and keep everyone seated. This is precautionary." That word did a lot of work. It softened the corners without lying about the core. Ms. Whitaker moved, stiff at first, then quicker, drawing the blinds with careful hands. The buzz of conversation dimmed into a tight hush. The intercom pinged. Principal Graves came over the speaker with a voice that tried for calm and landed close enough. "Out of an abundance of caution, we're initiating a temporary secure posture. Please remain in your current rooms. Doors closed. Instruction continues. This is not a drill." There was a flutter at those words, a ripple of the same uneasy relief a plane full of passengers feels when a pilot says everything is under control while banking hard enough to make the windows tilt the horizon. Nate stepped into the hall. Malik's gaze followed him until the door latched. The man in the dark suit had been joined by another, this one with a small earpiece and a demeanor that looked like he had run stairs and not broken a sweat. They spoke in short exchanges, eyes sweeping the corridor, then moved with purpose toward the east wing. Through the thin gap between the blinds, Malik watched them disappear past a cluster of framed photos and a trophy case that suddenly felt like a thin wall between 2 worlds. Inside the classroom, the temperature seemed to change. It wasn't colder, not exactly. It was more precise. Parents sat up straighter. Ms. Whitaker's smile hardened into something brittle. She tried to pick up where the program had left off, but her voice missed the key of normal by half a note. "Thank you all for your cooperation," she said. "We'll continue with our class activity. If anyone needs water, please raise your hand and I will send a student." No one raised a hand. They stared at the door the way you watch the sky after thunder, waiting to see if the next flash comes closer. Brent's father, a man who wore his suit like a verdict, cleared his throat and could not help himself. "Is this related to your work?" Mr. Thompson," he called toward the closed door as if the answer might bend to his certainty. Ms. Whitaker lifted a hand in a reflex that looked like control and sounded like fear. "Please, Mr. Hafford, let's remain calm." It did not land. The room had already decided to take its cues from the person who was not there. On the other side of the door, the hallway opened into a different story. The dark-suited man who had watched through the glass, Agent Cole, by the way he answered to his name, without turning his head, briefed Nate in crisp lines. A foreign signature had brushed the school's network 15 minutes ago, probed the camera feeds, then slid along the door locks the way a practiced hand tests a window frame. The attempt matched traffic Nate's team had been tracking all week, a pattern that started as background noise over military contractors and then, inexplicably, bent toward a private school whose only obvious asset was the density of last names people might want leverage over. "We flagged this site the moment your son enrolled," Cole said, his tone flat and unapologetic. "We built in alerts. Today they pinged twice. First the camera array, then the access pane near the server room. Could be a dry run. Could be phase 1. Either way, we're here." He nodded down the corridor where two more agents posted at opposite corners made casual look like a costume. "Soft lockdown buys us time," Nate said. "I want eyes on maintenance and vendors, anyone with access to electrical or IT rooms in the last 48 hours. Pull visitor logs from the front desk and cross with plate scans out front. If you can't verify a name, I want a face." "Already on it," Cole said, finger to his earpiece, listening, then relaying a request with the crisp shorthand of people who have practiced talking fast. Without spilling, he gestured to the east wing. "Server room is this way. Janitorial closet to doors down. We've got a custodian on the roster who clocked in early. New hire. Paperwork says temp through a contractor. The badge number pulls clean. The background check is thin." Nate was already moving. When he walked at full focus, he did not hurry. He cleared ground by refusing to waste motion. At the junction where the hall met the east wing, a poster for the spring fundraiser fluttered in the air conditioning like a flag trying to speak. They passed a glassed-in case stuffed with old yearbooks and a bronze bust of a founder whose gaze had never seen a day like this. Nate's phone vibrated. He glanced at it while his feet did not slow. Another alert. Access attempt on the secondary panel by the west stairwell. Someone was testing both ends of the building as if mapping nerves, looking for where pressure would produce the most flinch. Back in room 112, the silence began to hum. Noah leaned close to Malik so no one else could hear and asked if he was okay. Malik nodded even though okay felt too small and too simple. He watched Ms. Whitaker gather herself into a performance, the one where a teacher is both authority and comfort. She moved from desk to desk, whispering about journals and gratitude lists, suggesting they write about someone who inspires them. The suggestion landed wrong. More than one parent glanced at Malik as if the sentence had pointed, and then guiltily looked away. The door opened. Principal Graves entered, face controlled, eyes too bright. He spoke quickly and quietly to Ms. Whitaker, whose shoulders stiffened and then lowered with something that looked like compliance. He turned to the room with his public voice. "Thank you for your patience. We are coordinating with federal partners on a technical issue. There is no immediate danger. Please remain where you are. If you receive a message from your phone or watch asking for your location, do not respond. Disable Bluetooth connections for now. We will provide updates." He left as quickly as he had come. The words "no immediate danger" did their work and did not. Everyone clung to them, and no one believed them all the way. In the east wing, the air felt 10 degrees cooler. Cole keyed a code at a service door and pulled it open onto a short corridor that smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. The server room hummed behind a steel door with a small wired glass window. A thin strip of black adhesive along the frame told Nate more than any log. Someone had lifted the seal to test whether it would break on opening, then pressed it back into place with a patience that usually traveled with training. Across from the server room, a gray cabinet held networking hardware. A metal panel was misaligned by a fraction of an inch. It was the kind of detail most people would never see. Nate saw it and filed it where pattern recognition lives. Cole's radio clicked twice. West stairwell clear. Custodian not at his assigned station. A visitor badge unaccounted for from the front office. A delivery van had circled the block without stopping and then parked where a camera could not see the license plate if you did not already know the trick. The story was writing itself in a language Nate had learned a long time ago. Someone had softened the perimeter to see how the bones flexed. Someone inside or beside the building had the confidence to move while everyone else sat still. We split, Nate said. I want eyes on the West Hall. I'll sweep the service lanes between wings and meet you by the multi-purpose room. If you see anyone without a marked badge and a confirmed escort, you do not engage alone. You shadow and you call it. Copy, Cole said, already moving. Nate cut down a short back corridor very few students ever saw. He passed a stack of folding chairs and a cart of neglected AV equipment and a door marked mechanical that breathed a little dust when he brushed the handle with the back of his fingers. He listened. A faint vibration through the paint that did not match the building's usual rhythm. He keyed the latch and looked in. Nothing out of place at a glance. Two in place if anything. Coils of cable wound to neatly. A mop bucket so clean you could drink from it. On the cinder block wall a square of grime lighter than the rest where something had been mounted and removed within the last day. He took out his phone and snapped a picture for the team, then closed the door and let the latch bite home. He turned down the West Service Hall and heard the echo of footsteps that were not his. Not hurried, not casual, the kind of footfalls that understand which boards creak and which don't. He slowed, then matched his pace to the pattern, letting the other person stay just ahead. Through a narrow window he glimpsed a figure in charcoal coveralls pushing a utility cart. The cart looked wrong in a way no parent would catch. It rolled too quietly for its weight. A small black box sat just under the top shelf, half hidden by rags. The kind of device that listens and speaks without asking. Nate's phone buzzed again. A brief message from Cole. A second probe on the door locks, then a retreat. Whoever was touching the system knew he was touching it in company and was feeling the edges without committing. That could change in a heartbeat. Into 112 the air shifted again and everyone felt it without words. The sound of the building changed when the HVAC kicked into a different cycle. When the generators ticked a little more loudly than usual. When a lock that always clicked twice clicked once instead. Small things. Children are better at hearing small things than adults are. Several turned toward the door at the same moment, as if called. The utility cart stopped at the end of the West Hall. The man in coveralls set a rag on the handle and adjusted his cap. He pulled a key card from a pocket and held it to a reader by a side door that led toward the multi-purpose room where classes would gather during storms. The light flashed amber, then green. Access. The door popped. He slipped inside. Nate closed the distance with a measured stride and reached the door as it started to swing shut. He caught it with his fingertips, eased it open just enough to pass without letting it bang, and stepped into the cool dim of the multi-purpose room. Basketball hoops folded up against the ceiling. Bleachers tucked in like ribs. In the far corner a stack of mats made a low wall. He listened. Soft fabric rustle. A zipper sliding. The quiet click of plastic on plastic. He stepped around the mats and saw the cart parked beside a maintenance hatch. The man's back was toward him, shoulders hunched slightly as he reached into the lower shelf. Nate spoke in a voice that could be gentle and still take all the space it needed. Put your hands where I can see them. Slowly. The man froze, then lifted his hands to shoulder height without turning. A beat of silence stretched. When he turned his head, the smile he offered was too warm for the situation, and therefore colder than a threat. Facility services, he said, with an accent that tried to live nowhere. Just fixing a sensor. My ticket's in the system. His eyes dipped the tiniest bit toward the cart, toward the small black box, half concealed by a folded tarp. Nate stayed 3 paces back. Weight balanced, no wasted motion. We can look at the ticket together, he said evenly. Step away from the cart. Hands still visible. The man shifted his heel as if to comply, and then snapped his wrist toward the box with a speed that had nothing to do with cleaning. Nate moved first. A clean, economical step, a hand to the forearm that redirected instead of colliding, a grip that found leverage by memory. The device slid askew and bumped to the floor, skidding into the light. It was not a bomb. It was a throat, a compact node with multiple antennas that could drink a building's gossip and whisper back to anyone who knew the frequency. The man made a small mistake. He looked at the device as it slid, not at Nate. That glance was all the invitation Nate needed to end the motion. A turn, a press, a quiet thud that did not echo. Hands behind, knees folded, the kind of restraint that respected bones while insisting on stillness. Nate's phone vibrated true in his pocket. Cole's voice in his ear before the call connected. "We've got movement by the West Hall. Where are you?" "Multi-purpose room," Nate said, breath steady. One individual detained. Device intact, likely a listening node mapped to door controls. "Secure the perimeters. Pull Ms. Whitaker's corridor last. I don't want the panic there until I say so." "Copy," Cole said. "On our way." Nate kept his body between the man and the cart and looked at the hatch the cart had been parked beside. The screws on the panel were shiny, their edges unscuffed, as if someone had swapped in new hardware to look old. He scanned the room once more and thought not about the man on the floor, but about the pattern on the network screens he had seen 100 times. The first touch is never the only touch. The first hand distracts. The second hand takes. In room 212, Malik watched the second hand on the wall clock drag itself from one mark to the next, and felt something inside him line up with it. He thought about the word precaution, about how it could be a cushion or a warning. He thought about the black SUVs that seemed to appear wherever his father went, and the way the men inside them stood like answers to questions he was not allowed to ask. And then, through the closed door and the drawn blinds, the building spoke again in a new tone. The lights hiccuped. The projector blinked and reset. Someone in the hallway knocked a metal cart into a threshold, and the clang rang longer than it should have. Even Ms. Whitaker's voice could not smooth the edges anymore. In the multi-purpose room, the door at the far end cracked open, and Agent Cole slid through with 2 others in his wake. They took in the scene with quick eyes, understood the simple math of bodies and objects, and moved to secure the man on the floor. Cole nodded once at Nate, not congratulations, not surprise, just confirmation that one piece of the board now held still. He crouched by the device and studied the lights that pulsed along its edge. "This is listening," he said, then pointed at a secondary connector. "And that is teaching the doors how to behave for someone who isn't supposed to be here." He looked up. If someone planned to move a student quickly from one point to another, this is the script they would use. Nate's gaze went past Cole, past the secured operative, past the silent bleachers, and landed on a line only he could see. He felt the decision arrive in his chest before it reached his mouth. "We initiate a corridor-by-corridor escort to the outer perimeter. No sirens, no running. Teachers lead. Agents shadow. We keep parents with their kids. If someone is counting on chaos, we do not sell it to them." Cole keyed the mic and began to turn Nate's sentence into motion. Into 112, the door opened again, and the principal returned with the same controlled brightness he had worn all day, only now it fit better because it had nowhere else to go. "We're going to move to the courtyard in an orderly fashion," he said. "Please gather your things and follow your teacher. There is no need to hurry." No one believed the last sentence, but they obeyed it anyway. Ms. Whitaker's eyes met Malik's for a fraction longer than the others as she gestured toward the door. He could not read the look. Maybe apology, maybe calculation, maybe both. They stepped into the hall and joined a river that knew not to splash. Parents murmured comfort into their children's hair. Students held the edges of their bravest faces. Teachers spoke in voices that belonged to lullabies and evacuation plans at the same time. Malik felt Noah's sleeve against his own and the shape of his father's promise in his bones. "You are safe as long as I am here." He did not know if here meant this building or this moment or this breath. He held all 3 as if they were the same. Then, halfway to the courtyard, a sound rolled through the building that did not belong to any school day. Not a scream, not an explosion. A deep metallic cough from somewhere in the old ductwork, followed by the briefest falter in the emergency lights. People looked up as one. The river stumbled and steadied. Malik's heart thudded once, hard enough to feel in his throat. He did not know it yet, but the day had just shifted from proving a truth to surviving it. The river of parents, students, and teachers flowed through the corridors with careful restraint, but the strain showed at the edges. Voices lowered, footsteps shuffled faster than they were meant to, and the air carried the heavy weight of questions no one wanted to ask out loud. Malik stayed close to Noah, his eyes darting to the windows, catching glimpses of the black SUVs outside, the men in suits shifting their positions like chess pieces. When the doors opened onto the courtyard, the crowd spilled into the open air. The sky above was gray, low clouds stretching heavy across the horizon, but the open space felt safer than the narrow halls. Parents gathered tightly around their children, forming small protective clusters. Teachers raised their hands for order, their voices trembling just slightly as they instructed everyone to stay calm. Malik spotted his father almost immediately. Nate stood near the center of the courtyard, his presence cutting through the uncertainty. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't making grand gestures, but his stillness pulled everyone's attention to him. He spoke quietly with Agent Cole, their words brief, sharp, and serious. Cole nodded, his gaze sweeping the perimeter before signaling to the other agents stationed along the fence line. The principal, his face pale but composed, climbed onto the low stone platform near the flagpole. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice projecting with more confidence than it held. "We are relocating here only as a precaution. Please remain with your child's class. Our staff and our guests," his eyes flicked toward Nate, "are coordinating with law enforcement to ensure everyone's safety." The crowd murmured, a ripple of unease spreading. Parents exchanged glances, gripping their children's shoulders tighter. Malik looked up at his father, hoping for some kind of reassurance. Nate caught his eye and gave the smallest nod. It wasn't a smile, but it was enough. Then, across the courtyard, a sound cut through the tension. The metallic groan of a gate opening, to slow, to deliberate. Heads turned. One of the side entrances, usually locked during the day, stood ajar. A lone figure stepped through, dressed in the same coveralls Malik had seen in the hall earlier. His cap shadowed his face, but his posture carried something that didn't belong to a school employee. Two agents moved instantly, breaking from their posts and closing the distance. The man froze, his hands lifting in mock surrender, but there was no fear in his expression. Instead, he smiled faintly, as if he had already gotten what he came for. Device recovered. One agent barked into his comm, shoving the man against the wall. "He's clean," but Nate's eyes didn't leave him. He took a step closer, his voice low but edged with steel. "Who sent you?" The man only shrugged, the smirk never leaving his lips. "Doesn't matter. You were already watching, which means you already know." Cole pulled him back, the agents cuffing his wrists and leading him away. But the unease didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, because everyone knew one man alone didn't move shadows like this. Nate turned back to the courtyard, his gaze scanning the parents, the teachers, the students. His expression was steady, but Malik recognized the calculation behind his eyes. This wasn't over. Malik felt it too. The whispers in the hall, the SUV outside his house, the device hidden in the cart. It wasn't just about him anymore, or about Ms. Whitaker's smirk, or even about proving his father's job was real. It was about something bigger pressing in on their lives, something he didn't yet understand. And for the first time, Malik wondered if the price of the truth was heavier than he could carry. The courtyard held its silence like a lung refusing to exhale. Parents clutched their children tighter. The principal spoke words that sounded practiced but brittle, and teachers tried to herd their classes into neat lines, as if order could stitch back the calm. Malik stood in the center of it all, his father a fixed point beside him, and he could feel the entire weight of the morning pressing down on his chest. The man in coveralls had been taken away, but the air still carried his smirk. It lingered, daring everyone to believe this was finished. Nate stood straighter, his gaze fixed on the perimeter. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, and he read the screen quickly, his expression tightening by a fraction. He slipped it back inside, then spoke in a voice calm enough for the parents to hear, but sharp enough for the agents to act. "Everyone stays here. No one leaves until we clear the grounds. The words cut through the murmur. The courtyard stilled again. Then, from the corner of the field, a second sound rolled through, the high-pitched screech of metal dragged against concrete. Every head turned. At the far gate, another figure appeared, this one not in coveralls but in plain dark clothes, his face hidden under a hood. Before the agents could reach him, he dropped a small object to the ground. It clicked once, lights flashing red, then went still. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Device," an agent shouted, rushing forward. Nate raised a hand, halting him. He walked forward himself, his steps slow and deliberate, his presence cutting through the fear like a blade. Malik wanted to call out, to stop him, but his throat locked. He could only watch as his father knelt by the object, studied it for 3 seconds that stretched into eternity, then lifted it carefully. "Decoy," Nate said, his voice steady, holding it up for the agents to see. "Signal jammer, not explosive. They want us nervous, not harmed." The hooded man at the gate bolted, but he didn't make it 3 steps before agents closed in from both sides, slamming him to the ground with practiced precision. This one didn't smirk. He stayed silent as they hauled him to his feet, his eyes fixed on Nate with a look that wasn't fear, wasn't even anger. It was recognition. Cole joined Nate, his words clipped. "That makes 2 operatives in 1 morning, both tied to the same network we've been chasing. They weren't here for random disruption." "No," Nate said firmly, still holding the jammer. "They were here for access, and for leverage." His eyes flicked across the courtyard, across the children gathered close to their parents, across Malik watching from near the center. For the first time, Malik understood what leverage meant. It meant him. The crowd began to shift uneasily, the edges fraying under the weight of too many questions. The principal tried to speak again, but his words tangled with fear. Ms. Whitaker stood frozen near the back, her face pale, her hands gripping the edge of her desk as if it could anchor her. For once, she had no words. Nate stepped forward, raising his voice just enough to carry. "Everyone here is safe. Let me be clear about that. There are people in this world who use fear as a weapon, who count on us to panic so they can move in the shadows. But today, that didn't work. Not on us." The parents listened, some nodding, some clutching their children tighter. Even Brent, who had once mocked Malik the loudest, stood close to his father with wide eyes, silent for the first time. Nate's voice softened, but it carried farther because of it. "The lesson today isn't about what I do for work. It's about the truth. My son told the truth, and he was ridiculed for it. Not by strangers, not by enemies, but by people who should have known better. That will not happen again." His words cut straight to Ms. Whitaker. She shifted in place, her mouth opening as if to reply, but no sound came. Parents around her turned their eyes on her, the weight of judgment now resting where it belonged. Malik felt something shift inside him then, something heavier than pride, something stronger than relief. His father hadn't just defended his job, he had defended him. By the time the all-clear came and the crowd began to disperse, the school grounds felt different. Parents spoke in hushed voices, teachers moved with shaken composure, and students clung to the details like secrets they would never forget. Malik walked beside his father through the gates, Noah trailing close. The SUV still lined the street, engines humming low, agents scanning the sidewalks. In the car, Malik finally spoke. "They were here because of you, weren't they?" Nate glanced at him, his eyes steady. "They were here because of what I do, yes. But don't mistake that for weakness. We faced it, and we walked out together." Malik looked out the window, the school shrinking behind them, and for the first time, the building didn't feel like a fortress of ridicule. It felt like a place that had finally seen him. He turned back to his father. "I'm glad you came." Nate reached over, resting his hand briefly on his son's shoulder. "I'll always come." The hum of the car filled the silence after that, but Malik didn't mind. The truth had been proven, the laughter silenced, the shadow confronted. The cost was heavy, but the weight didn't scare him anymore. Not with his father beside him. And though the SUVs would keep following, though the men in suits would linger in shadows, Malik understood something he hadn't before. The truth wasn't just something to defend. It was something to carry, and he would carry it. If you found yourself drawn into this story, make sure to subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Stories about truth, about resilience, and about the moments that change everything.